China's latest AI breakthrough has leapfrogged the world.
I think we should take the development out of China very, very seriously.
A game-changing move that does not come from OpenAI, Google, or Meta.
There is a new model that has all of the valley buzzing.
But from a Chinese lab called DeepSeek.
It's opened a lot of eyes of what is actually happening in AI in China.
What took Google and OpenAI years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build, DeepSeek says took it just 2 months and less than $6 million.
They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
I'm Deirdre Bosa with the Tech Check Take, China's AI breakthrough. It was a technological leap that shocked Silicon Valley. A newly unveiled, free, open source AI model that beat some of the most powerful ones on the market. But it wasn't a new launch from OpenAI or model announcement from Anthropic. This one was built in the East by a Chinese research lab called DeepSeek. And the details behind its development stunned top AI researchers here in the US. First, the cost. The AI lab reportedly spent just $5.6 million to build DeepSeek version 3. Compare that to OpenAI, which is spending $5 billion a year. And Google, which expects capital expenditures in 2024 to soar to over $50 billion. And then there's Microsoft that shelled out more than $13 billion just to invest in OpenAI. But even more stunning, how DeepSeek's scrappier model was able to outperform the lavishly funded American ones.
To see the DeepSeek new model, it's super impressive in terms of both how they have really effectively done an open source model that does what is this inference time compute, and it's super compute efficient.
It beat Meta's Llama, OpenAI's GPT-4o, and Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 3.5 on accuracy on wide-ranging tests, a subset of 500 math problems, an AI math evaluation, coding competitions, and a test of spotting and fixing bugs in code. Quickly following that up with a new reasoning model called R1, which just as easily outperformed OpenAI's cutting-edge O1 in some of those third-party tests.
Today, we released Humanity's Last Exam, which is a new evaluation or benchmark of AI models that we produced by getting, math, physics, biology, chemistry professors to provide the hardest questions they could possibly imagine. DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models.
They accomplished all that despite the strict semiconductor restrictions that the US government has imposed on China, which has essentially shackled them out of computing power. Washington has drawn a hard line against China in the AI race, cutting the country off from receiving America's most powerful chips like NVIDIA's H100 GPUs. Those were once thought to be essential to building a competitive AI model, with startups and big tech firms alike scrambling to get their hands on any available. But DeepSeek turned that on its head, sidestepping the rules by using NVIDIA's less performant H800s to build the latest model and showing that the chip export controls were not the chokehold DC intended.
They were able to take whatever hardware they were trained on, but use it way more efficiently.
But just who's behind DeepSeek anyway? Despite its breakthrough, very, very little is known about its lab and its founder, Liang Wenfeng. According to Chinese media reports, DeepSeek was born out of a Chinese hedge fund called High Flyer Quant that manages about $8 billion in assets. The mission on its developer site, it reads simply, unravel the mystery of AGI with curiosity. Answer the essential question with long-termism. The leading American AI startups, meanwhile, OpenAI and Anthropic, they have detailed charters and constitutions that lay out their principles and their founding missions, lengthy sections on AI safety and responsibility. Despite several attempts to reach someone at DeepSeek, we never got a response.
How did they actually assemble this talent? How did they assemble all the hardware? How did they assemble the data to do all this? We don't know. And it's never been publicized, and hopefully we can learn that.
But the mystery brings into sharp relief just how urgent and complex the AI face-off against China has become. Because it's not just DeepSeek. Other, more well-known Chinese AI models have carved out positions in the race with limited resources as well. Kai-Fu Lee, he's one of the leading AI researchers in China, formerly leading Google's operations there. Now his startup, 01.ai, it's attracting attention, becoming a unicorn just 8 months after founding and bringing in almost $14 million in revenue in 2024.
The thing that shocks my friends in the Silicon Valley is not just our performance, but that we trained the model with only $3 million. And GPT-4 was trained by 80 to 100 million.
Trained with just $3 million. Alibaba's QN, meanwhile, cut costs by as much as 85% on its large language models in a bid to attract more developers and signaling that the race is on. China's breakthrough undermines the lead that our AI labs were once thought to have. In early 2024, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, he predicted China was 2 to 3 years behind the US in AI. But now, Schmidt is singing a different tune. Here he is on ABC's This Week.
Well, I used to think we were a couple of years ahead of China, but China has caught up in the last 6 months in a way that is remarkable. The fact of the matter is that a couple of the Chinese programs, one, for example, is called DeepSeek, looks like they've caught up.
It raises major questions about just how wide OpenAI's moat really is. Back when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world in November of 2022, it was unprecedented and uncontested. Now the company faces not only the international competition from Chinese models, but fierce domestic competition from Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and Meta's open source Llama model. And now the game has changed. The widespread availability of powerful open source models allows developers to skip the demanding, capital-intensive steps of building and training models themselves. Now they can build on top of existing models, making it significantly easier to jump to the frontier, that is the front of the race, with a smaller budget and a smaller team.
In the last 2 weeks, AI research teams have really opened their eyes and have become way more ambitious on what's possible with a lot less capital. Right. So previously, to get to the frontier, you would have to think about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and perhaps $1 billion of investment. What DeepSeek has now done here in Silicon Valley is it's opened our eyes to what you can actually accomplish with 10, 15, 20, $30 million.
It also means any company like OpenAI that claims the frontier today could lose it tomorrow. That's how DeepSeek was able to catch up so quickly. It started building on the existing frontier of AI. Its approach focusing on iterating on existing technology rather than reinventing the wheel.
They can take a really good big model and use a process called distillation. And what distillation is basically you use a very large model to help your small model get smart at the thing that you want it to get smart at. And that's actually very cost efficient.
It closed the gap by using available data sets, applying innovative tweaks, and leveraging existing models. So much so that DeepSeek's model has run into an identity crisis. It's convinced that it's ChatGPT. When you ask it directly, what model are you? DeepSeek responds, I'm an AI language model created by OpenAI, specifically based on the GPT-4 architecture. Leading OpenAI CEO Sam Altman to post in a thinly veiled shot at DeepSeek just days after the model was released, it's relatively easy to copy something that you know works. It's extremely hard to do something new, risky, and difficult when you don't know if it will work. But that's not exactly what DeepSeek did. It emulated GPT by leveraging OpenAI's existing outputs and architecture principles while quietly introducing its own enhancements, really blurring the line between itself and ChatGPT. It all puts pressure on a closed source leader like OpenAI to justify its costlier model as more and potentially nimbler competitors emerge.
Everybody copies everybody in this field. You can say Google did the transformer first, it's not OpenAI, and OpenAI just copied it. Google built the first large language models, they didn't productize it, but OpenAI did it in a productized way. So you can say all this in many ways, it doesn't matter.
So if everyone is copying one another, it raises the question, is massive spend on individual LLMs even a good investment anymore? Now, no one has as much at stake as OpenAI. The startup raised over $6 billion in its last funding round alone. But the company has yet to turn a profit. And with its core business centered on building the models, it's much more exposed than companies like Google and Amazon, who have cloud and ad businesses bankrolling their spend. For OpenAI, reasoning will be key. A model that thinks before it generates a response, going beyond pattern recognition to analyze, draw logical conclusions, and solve really complex problems. For now, the startup's O1 reasoning model, it's still cutting edge, but for how long?
Researchers at Berkeley showed that they could build a reasoning model for $450 just last week. So you can actually create these models that do thinking for much, much less. You don't need those huge amounts to pre-train the model. So I think the game is shifting.
It means that staying on top may require as much creativity as capital. DeepSeek's breakthrough also comes at a very tricky time for the AI darling, just as OpenAI is moving to a for-profit model and facing unprecedented brain drain. Can it raise more money at ever higher valuations if the game is changing? As Chamath Palihapitiya puts it, let me say the quiet part out loud. AI model building is a money trap. Those chip restrictions from the US government, they were intended to slow down the race, to keep American tech on American ground, to stay ahead in the race.
What we want to do is we want to keep it in this country. China is a competitor and others are competitors.
So instead, the restrictions might have been just what China needed.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Because they had to go figure out workarounds, they actually ended up building something a lot more efficient.
It's really remarkable the amount of progress they've made with as little capital as it's taken them to make that progress.
It drove them to get creative, with huge implications. DeepSeek is an open source model, meaning that developers have full access and they can customize its weights or fine-tune it to their liking.
It's known that once open source is caught up or improved over closed source software, all developers migrate to that.
But key is that it's also inexpensive. The lower the cost, the more attractive it is for developers to adopt.
The bottom line is our inference cost is 10 cents per million tokens. And that's 1/30th of what the typical comparable model charges.
And where's it going?
The 10 cents would lead to building apps for much lower costs. So if you wanted to build a U.com or Perplexity or some other app, you can either pay OpenAI $4.40 per million tokens, or if you have our model, it costs you just 10 cents.
It could mean that the prevailing model in global AI may be open source. As organizations and nations come around to the idea that collaboration and decentralization, those things can drive innovation faster and more efficiently than proprietary closed ecosystems. A cheaper, more efficient, widely adopted open source model from China, that could lead to a major shift in dynamics.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mind share, the ecosystem.
In other words, the adoption of a Chinese open source model at scale, that could undermine US leadership while embedding China more deeply into the fabric of global tech infrastructure.
There's always like a point where open source can stop being open source too, right? So the licenses are very favorable today, but if...
You could close it.
Exactly. If over time, they can always change the license. So it's important that we actually have people here in America building, and that's why Meta is so important.
Another consequence of China's AI breakthrough is giving its Communist Party control of the narrative. AI models built in China, they're forced to adhere to a certain set of rules set by the state. They must embody core socialist values. Studies have shown that models created by Tencent and Alibaba, they will censor historical events like Tiananmen Square, deny human rights abuse, and filter criticism of Chinese political leaders.
That contest is about whether we're going to have democratic AI informed by democratic values built to serve democratic purposes, or we're going to end up with autocratic AI.
If developers really begin to adopt these models en masse because they're more efficient, that could have a serious ripple effect, trickle down to even consumer-facing AI applications, and influence how trustworthy those AI-generated responses from chatbots really are.
There's really only two countries right now in the world that can build this at scale, and that is the US and China. And so, the consequences, the stakes in and around this are just enormous.
Enormous stakes, enormous consequences, and hanging in the balance, America's lead. For a topic so complex and new, we turn to an expert who's actually building in the space and model agnostic. Perplexity co-founder and CEO Arvind Srinivas, who you heard from throughout our piece, he sat down with me for more than 30 minutes to discuss DeepSeek and its implications, as well as Perplexity's roadmap. We think it's worth listening to that whole conversation, so here it is.
So first, I want to know what the stakes are. Describe the AI race between China and the US and what's at stake.
Okay, so first of all, China has a lot of disadvantages in competing with the US. Number one is the fact that they don't get access to all the hardware that we have access to here. So they're kind of working with lower end GPUs than us. It's almost like working with the previous generation GPUs crappily. And the fact that the bigger models tend to be more smarter naturally puts them at disadvantage. But the flip side of this is that necessity is the mother of invention. Because they had to go figure out workarounds, they actually ended up building something a lot more efficient. It's like saying, hey, look, you guys really got to get a top-notch model, and I'm not going to give you resources. And like figure out something, right? Unless it's mathematically possible to prove that it's impossible to do so, you can always try to like come up with something more efficient. But that is likely to make them come up with a more efficient solution than America. And of course, they have open sourced it, so we can still adopt something like that here. But that kind of talent they're building to do that will become an edge for them over time, right? The leading open source model in America is Meta's Llama family. It's really good. It's kind of like a model that you can run on a computer. But even though it got pretty close to GPT-4 and Sonnet at the time of its release, the model that was closest in quality was the giant 405B, not the 70B that you could run on your computer. And so there was still not a small, cheap, fast, efficient open source model that rivaled the most powerful closed models from OpenAI and Anthropic. Nothing from America, nothing from Mistral AI either. And then these guys come out with like a crazy model that's like 10x cheaper in API pricing than GPT-4o and 15x cheaper than Sonnet, I believe. Really fast, 60 tokens per second, and pretty much equal or better in some benchmarks and worse in some others, but like roughly in that ballpark of 4O's quality. And they did it all with like approximately just 2048 H800 GPUs, which is actually equivalent to like somewhere around 1500 or 1500 H100 GPUs. That's like 20 to 30x lower than the amount of GPUs that GPT-4 is usually trained on. They did roughly $5 million in total compute budget. They did it with so little money and such an amazing model, gave it away for free, wrote a technical paper, and definitely it makes us all question like, okay, like if we have the equivalent of Doge for like model training, this is an example of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Efficiency
Yeah.
is what you're getting at. So fraction of the price,
Yeah.
fraction of the time,
Yeah.
dumbed down GPUs essentially. What was your surprise when you understood what they had done?
So my surprise was that when I actually went through the technical paper, the amount of clever solutions they came up with, first of all, they train a mixture of experts model. It's not that easy to train. There's a lot of like, the main reason people find it difficult to catch up with OpenAI, especially in the MOE architecture, is that there's a lot of irregular loss spikes. The numerics are not stable. So often like you got to restart the training checkpoint again, and a lot of infrastructure needs to be built for that. And they came up with very clever solutions to balance that without adding additional hacks. And they also figured out floating point 8-bit training, at least for some of the numerics. And they cleverly figured out which has to be in higher precision, which has to be in lower precision. To my knowledge, I think floating point 8 training is not that well understood. I think most of the training in America is still running in FP16, maybe OpenAI, and some people are trying to explore that, but it's pretty difficult to get it right. So because necessity is a mother of invention, because they don't have that much memory, that many GPUs, they figured out a lot of numerical stability stuff that makes their training work, and they claimed in the paper that for majority of the training was stable, which means what? They can always rerun those training runs again, and on more data or better data, and then it only trained for 60 days, so it's pretty amazing.
Safe to say you were surprised.
So I was definitely surprised. Usually the wisdom, or like I wouldn't say wisdom, the myth is that Chinese are just good at copying. So if we stop writing research papers in America, if we stop describing the details of our infrastructure or architecture, and stop open sourcing, they're not going to be able to catch up. But the reality is some of the details in DeepSeek v3 are so good that I wouldn't be surprised if Meta took a look at it and incorporated some of that in
Tried to
Llama
copy
4.
them.
Right? I wouldn't necessarily say copy. It's all like, sharing science, engineering. But the point is like, it's changing. Like, it's not like China is copycat. They're also innovating.
We don't know exactly the data that it was trained on, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's open source. We know some of the ways and things it was trained on, but not everything.
Correct.
And there's this idea that it was trained on public ChatGPT outputs, which would mean it just was copied, but you're saying it goes beyond that. There's real innovation in that.
Yeah, look, I mean, they've trained it on 14.8 trillion tokens. The internet has so much ChatGPT. If you actually go to any LinkedIn post or X post now, most of the comments are written by AI. You can just see it. Like, people are just trying to write. In fact, even within X, there's like a Grok tweet enhancer, or in LinkedIn there's a AI enhancer, or in Google Docs and Word, there are AI tools to like rewrite your stuff. So if you do something there and copy paste somewhere on the internet, it's naturally going to have some elements of a ChatGPT like training, right? And there's a lot of people who don't even bother to strip away that I'm a language model part. So they just paste it somewhere, and like, it's very difficult to control for this. I think XAI has spoken about this too. So I wouldn't like disregard their technical accomplishment just because like for some prompts, like who are you, or like which model are you, it responds like that. It doesn't even matter in my opinion.
For a long time, we thought, I don't know if you agreed with this, China was behind in AI. What does this do to that race? Can we say that China is catching up, or has it caught up?
I mean, like, if we say that Meta is catching up to OpenAI and Anthropic, if you make that claim, then the same claim can be made for China catching up to America. A lot of papers from China that have tried to replicate O1. In fact, I saw more papers from China after O1 announcement that tried to replicate it than from America. Like, and the amount of compute DeepSeek has access to is roughly similar to what PhD students in the US have access to. By the way, this is not meant to like criticize others. Like, even for ourselves, like, for Perplexity, we decided not to train models because we thought it's like a very expensive thing. And we thought like there's no way to catch up with the rest. But
will you incorporate DeepSeek into Perplexity?
We already are beginning to use it. I think they have an API, and we're also, they have open source of it, so we can host it ourselves too. And it's good to like try to start using that, because it actually allows us to do a lot of the things at lower cost. But what I'm kind of thinking is beyond that, which is like, okay, if these guys actually could train such a great model with this, good team, like, and there's no excuse anymore for companies in the US, including ourselves, to like not try to do something like that.
You hear a lot in public from a lot of, thought leaders in generative AI, both on the research side, on the entrepreneurial side, like Elon Musk and others, say that China can't catch up. Like, the stakes are too big, the geopolitical stakes. Whoever dominates AI is going to kind of dominate the economy, dominate the world. It's been talked about in those massive terms. Are you worried about what China proved it was able to do?
Firstly, I don't know if Elon ever said China can't catch up. I'm not aware.
Just the threat of China. He's only identified the threat of letting China. And Sam Altman has said similar things. We can't let China win the AI race.
It's all. I think you got to decouple what someone like Sam says to like what is in his self-interest, right? Look, I think my point is like whatever you did to not let them catch up didn't even matter. They ended up catching up anyway.
Necessity is the mother of invention, like you said.
And it's actually, what's more dangerous than trying to do all the things to like not let them catch up and like, all the stuff is, what's more dangerous is they have the best open source model and all the American developers are building on that.
Right.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mind share, the ecosystem. If the entire American AI ecosystem, look, in general, it's known that once open source is caught up or improved over closed source software, all developers migrate to that. It's historically known, right?
When Llama was being built and becoming more widely used, there was this question, should we trust Zuckerberg? But now the question is, should we trust China? That's a very
You should trust
different...
open source. That's the, like, it's not about who, is it Zuckerberg or is it...
Does it matter then if it's Chinese, if it's open source?
Look, it doesn't matter in the sense that you still have full control. You run it as your own, set of weights on your own computer. You are in charge of the model. But it's not a great look for our own talent to rely on software built by others. Even if it's open source, there's always a point where open source can stop being open source too, right? So the licenses are very favorable today, but
you could close it.
Exactly. If over time, they can always change the license. So it's important that we actually have people here in America building, and that's why Meta is so important. Like I still think Meta will build a better model than DeepSeek v3 and open source it, and what they'll call it Llama 4 or 3 point something, doesn't matter. But I think what is more key is that we don't try to focus all our energy on banning them and stopping them, and just try to outcompete and win them. That's just the American way of doing things. Just be better.
And it feels like there's, we hear a lot more about these Chinese companies who are developing in a similar way, a lot more efficiently, a lot more cost effectively, right?
Yeah. Again, look, it's hard to fake scarcity, right? If you raise 10 billion and you're decided to spend 80% of it on a compute cluster, it's hard for you to come up with the exact same solution that someone with 5 million would do. And there's no point, no need to sort of berate those who are putting more money in. They're trying to do it as fast as they can.
When we say open source, there's so many different versions. Some people criticize Meta for not publishing everything. And even DeepSeek itself isn't totally transparent.
Sure. Yeah, you can go to the limits of open source and say, I should exactly be able to replicate your training run. But first of all, how many people even have the resources to do that? And compare, I think the amount of detail they've shared in the technical report, actually Meta did that too, by the way. Meta's Llama 3.3 technical report is incredibly detailed and very great for science. So the amount of details these people are sharing is already a lot more than what the other companies are doing right now.
When you think about how much it costs DeepSeek to do this, less than $6 million, think about what OpenAI has spent to develop GPT models. What does that mean for the closed source model, ecosystem trajectory, momentum? What does it mean for OpenAI?
I mean, it's very clear that we'll have an open source version of 4.0 or even better than that and much cheaper than that, open source, completely this year.
Made by OpenAI?
Probably not. Most likely not. And I don't think they care if it's not made by them. I think they've already moved to a new paradigm called the O1 family of models. Look, I can't Ilya Sutskever came and said pre-training is at a wall, right? So, I mean, he didn't exactly use the word, but he clearly said the age of pre-training is over.
Many people have said that.
Right? So that doesn't mean scaling has hit a wall. I think we're scaling on different dimensions now. The amount of time model spends thinking at test time, reinforcement learning, trying to make the model, okay, if it doesn't know what to do for a new prompt, it'll go and reason and collect data and interact with the world, use a bunch of tools. I think that's where things are headed. And I feel like OpenAI is more focused on that right now.
Yeah. Instead of just the bigger, better model,
correct,
reasoning capacities. But didn't you say that DeepSeek is likely to turn their attention to reasoning?
100%. I think they will. And that's why I'm pretty excited about what they'll produce next.
I guess then my question is sort of, what's OpenAI's moat now?
Well, I still think that no one else has produced a system similar to the O1 yet, exactly. I know that like there's debates about whether O1 is actually worth it. On maybe a few prompts it's really better, but like most of the times it's not producing any differentiated output from Sonnet. But at least the results they showed in O3 where they had like competitive coding performance and almost like an AI software engineer level.
Isn't it just a matter of time though before the internet is filled with reasoning data that DeepSeek?
Again, it's possible. Nobody knows yet.
Yeah.
So until it's done, it's still uncertain, right?
Right.
So maybe that uncertainty is their mode, that like no one else has the same reasoning capability yet. But by end of this year, will there be multiple players even in the reasoning arena? I absolutely think so.
So are we seeing the commoditization of large language models?
I think we'll see a similar trajectory, just like how in pre-training and like post-training, that sort of system 4.0 getting commoditized, where this year will be a lot more commoditization there. I think the reasoning kind of models will go through a similar trajectory, where in the beginning, one or two players really know how to do it, but over time, like...
And who knows, right? Because OpenAI could make another advancement to focus on.
Correct.
But right now, reasoning is their mode.
But by the way, if advancements keep happening again and again and again, like I think the meaning of the word advancement also loses some of its value, right?
Totally. Even now, it's very difficult, right? Because there's pre-training advancements.
Yeah.
And then we've moved into a different phase.
Yeah. So what is guaranteed to happen is whatever models exist today, that level of reasoning, that level of multimodal capability in like 5 to 10x cheaper models, open source, all that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. What is unclear is if something like a model that reasons at test time will be extremely cheap enough that like we can just all run it on our phones. I think that's not clear to me yet.
It feels like so much of the landscape has changed with what DeepSeek was able to prove. Could you call it China's ChatGPT moment?
Possible. I mean, I think it certainly probably gave them a lot of confidence that like, we're not really behind, and no matter what you do to restrict our compute, like we can always figure out some workarounds. And I'm sure the team feels pumped about the results.
How does this change like the investment landscape? The hyperscalers that are spending tens of billions of dollars a year on CapEx have just ramped it up huge, and OpenAI and Anthropic that are raising billions of dollars for GPUs, essentially. That what DeepSeek told us is you don't necessarily need that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's very clear that they're gonna go even harder on reasoning because they understand that like whatever they were building in the previous 2 years is getting extremely cheap, that it doesn't make sense to go justify raising that amount of
spending
capital.
Proposition the same? Do they need the same amount of high-end GPUs, or can you reason using the lower-end ones that DeepSeek has?
Again, it's hard to say no until proven it's not. But I guess like in the spirit of moving fast, you would want to use the high-end chips, and you would want to like move faster than your competitors. I think like the best talent still wants to work in the team that made it happen first. There's always some glory to like who did this actually, like who's the real pioneer versus who's the fast follow, right?
That was like kind of like Sam Altman's tweet, kind of veiled response to what DeepSeek has been able to. He kind of implied that they just copied and anyone can copy, right?
Yeah, but then you can always say that like everybody copies everybody in this field. You can say Google did the transformer first. It's not OpenAI, and OpenAI just copied it. Google built the first large language models. They didn't productize it, but OpenAI did it in a productized way. So you can say all this in many ways. It doesn't matter.
I remember asking you, being like, why don't you want to build the model?
Yeah,
I
know.
That's the glory. And a year later, just 1 year later, you look very, very smart to not engage in that extremely expensive race that has become so competitive. And you kind of have this lead now in what everyone wants to see now, which is like real world applications, killer applications of generative AI. Talk a little bit about like that decision and how that's sort of guided you where you see Perplexity going from here?
Look, 1 year ago, I don't even think we had something like, this is what, like 2024 beginning, right? I feel like we didn't even have something like Sonnet 3.5.
Right.
We had GPT-4, I believe, and it was kind of nobody else was able to catch up to it.
Yeah.
But there was no multimodal, nothing. And my sense was like, okay, if people with way more resources and way more talent cannot catch up, it's pretty difficult to play that game. So let's play a different game. Anyway, people want to use these models, and there's one use case of asking questions and getting accurate answers with sources, with real-time information, accurate information. There's still a lot of work there to do outside the model and making sure the product works reliably, keep scaling it up to usage, keep building custom UIs. There's just a lot of work to do, and we would focus on that. And we would benefit from all the tailwinds of models getting better and better. That's essentially what happened. In fact, I would say Sonnet 3.5 made our product so good in the sense that if you use Sonnet 3.5 as the model choice within Perplexity, it's very difficult to find a hallucination. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it dramatically reduced the rate of hallucinations, which meant the problem of question answering, asking a question, getting an answer, doing a fact checks, research, going and asking anything out there, because almost all the information is on the web, was such a big unlock. And that helped us grow 10x over the course of the year in terms of usage.
And you've made huge strides in terms of users, and we hear on CNBC a lot, like big investors who are huge fans.
Yeah.
Jensen Huang himself, right?
Yeah,
you mentioned it in his keynote.
Yeah.
The other night.
He's a pretty regular user. Actually, he's not just saying it. He's actually a pretty regular user.
So a year ago, we weren't even talking about monetization because you guys were just so new and you wanted to, get yourselves out there and build some scale. But now you are looking at things like that, increasingly an ad model, right?
Yeah, we're experimenting with it. I know like there's some controversy on like why should we do ads, whether you can have a truthful answer engine despite having ads. And in my opinion, we've been pretty proactively thoughtful about it, where we said, okay, as long as the answer is always accurate, unbiased, and not corrupted by someone's like advertising budget, only you get to see some sponsored questions, and even the answers to those sponsored questions are not influenced by them. And questions are also like, not picked in a way where it's manipulative. Sure, there's some things that the advertiser also wants, which is they want you to know about their brand and they want you to know the best parts of their brand. Just like how you go and if you're introducing yourself to someone, you want them to see the best parts of you, right? So that's all there, but you still don't have to click on a sponsored question. You can ignore it, and we are only charging them CPM right now. So we ourselves are not even incentivized to make you click yet. So I think considering all this, we're actually trying to get it right long term. Instead of going the Google way of forcing you to click on links.
I remember when people were talking about the commoditization of models a year ago, and you thought, oh, it was controversial, but now it's not controversial. It's kind of like that's happening.
Yeah.
And you keeping your eye on that is smart.
By the way, we benefit a lot from model commoditization, except we also need to figure out something to offer to the paid users, like a more sophisticated research agent that can do like multi-step reasoning, go and like do like 15 minutes worth of searching and give you like a analysis, an analyst type of answer. All that's going to come, all that's going to stay in the product. Nothing changes there. But there's a ton of questions every free user asks day-to-day basis that needs to be quick, fast answers. Like it shouldn't be slow. And all that will be free, whether you like it or not. It has to be free. That's what people are used to. And that means like figuring out a way to make that free traffic also monetizable.
So you're not trying to change user habits, but it's interesting because you are kind of trying to teach new habits to advertisers. They can't have everything that they have in a Google 10 blue links search. What's the response been from them so far? Are they willing to accept some of the trade-offs?
Yeah, I mean, that's why they're trying stuff. Like Intuit is working with us, and then there's many other brands. Dell, like all these people are working with us to test, right? They're also excited about look, everyone knows that like whether they like it or not, 5 to 10 years from now, most people are going to be asking AIs most of the things and not on the traditional search engine. Everybody understands that.
They have
so everybody wants to be early adopters of the new platforms, new UX, and learn from it and build things together. Not like, they're not viewing it as like, okay, you guys go figure out everything else and then we'll come later.
I'm smiling because it goes back perfectly to the point you made when you first sat down today, which is necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And that's what advertisers are essentially looking at. They're saying this field is changing. We have to learn to adapt with it. Okay, Arvind, I took up so much of your time. Thank you so much for taking the time.